All game masters start somewhere. Whether starting out playing as a player or maybe jumping in and running their very own game from the beginning, game masters have an origin story, an evolution. In this episode, you will get to hear the origin story of Andy Scheirer, high school math teacher, listener of the CTG, and a newcomer to the hobby of tabletop RPGs. Andy will tell us how he has been sucked in to the tabletop gaming world. We will cover creating characters, his experience as a player in D&D, and we'll discuss Andy's ambition as well as his next steps for starting his very own campaign, putting on the mantle of Gamemaster for the very first time. Welcome to Claim to Game. We help tabletop gamers have a great time with friends to experience amazing stories. It can be overwhelming to start and run great games. Let's make it easier for you to play any game you want to have fun with your friends. I'm Clint Scheirer. I've helped thousands of students in my career find their way to better themselves and better their game. With more than 10 years experience coaching, teaching, and developing easy-to-follow learning plans, I know I can help you too. It's time for you to make your claim to game. Hey, Andy, hello and welcome to Claim to Game. I am so glad that you are here today because you are a listener of our show. You actually listen to the show, you've listened to some episodes, and we are going to talk a little bit about your tabletop RPG journey, and I'm really pumped to have you here today. So I'm going to kick it off with the first question. Can you tell me how you got into playing tabletop role-playing games?
Yeah, definitely. I was going to my graduate program to become a teacher, and I've always liked fantasy, at least for a long time, like Lord of the Rings, that kind of stuff. Some of my buddies were like, "Hey, we're going to do a D&D campaign. Do you want to join?" I'm like, "Absolutely." Just got together with them, made a character, and that was that. We lasted for about a year, and then we kind of fizzled out, but it was really fun every Sunday for a while.
What drew you in? When you played your first game, you loved fantasy, but like, what about fantasy was fun? What about pretending to be a pretend person made you want to come back the next Sunday?
Oh, I mean, it's just, what can't imagine it not being fun, like you're able to do stuff that you cannot do on your own, like in real life, right? Like I can't just walk down the street and find some weird tavern owner who's going to give me a quest. And, me and my friends can mess with that tavern owner, we can just say whatever we want and you roll some dice, and it's just a great way to goof off, like in a way that you could never do in real life. And that's what I love about it.
So when you were playing your first game, what kind of character were you? What was your race? What was your class? We call it Ancestry and Pathfinder, but you were playing D&D. Like, what were you and why did you choose that character?
My character is, to sum it up as succinctly as possible, it's a quagmire or a warlock,
Giggity, giggity.
So most of his backstory is he owns a brothel called the Randy Rogue, and passed down from his father and his pappy before him.
Family business, great.
And his name's Long Dong Mithril, which came to me. One of my buddies actually helped me out with that, kind of bouncing names back and forth.
Long John Mithril, like Mithril from Lord of the Rings, like the special metal.
There's actually a porn star named Long Dong Silver.
Oh, dong. Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense.
And so we were making jokes about that. And my buddy goes, "What about Mithril? Like that makes it way more fantasy relevant."
Ah, okay.
and D-Myth was born.
True silver. All right. You were drawn in by being able to test a fantasy world, being able to do things that you can't do in the real world, things that you can roll dice for and see the results. We were talking a little bit earlier that your profession, you're a math teacher. You like to teach math. Do you find that D&D kind of caters to that love of that subject, like being able to use math and use probability and stuff like that?
Yeah, no, I'm often, we have a healthy population of students who like D&D out here. And so I'm often talking like probabilities, like, oh, what if you have a D20? What if you have this? That's your probabilities, And so it definitely helps to relate dice to probabilities. I mean, it's a really good way to engage with these kids who maybe don't care about math, but they like D&D. So I'm in here like, these are your odds when you have this check, and it pulls them in a little.
I remember growing up, you go to the class, right? And the teacher's like, math is everywhere. You're going to have to use it one day.
Yeah.
And you're just like, yeah, right. I use more math in D&D. That's like the hardest thing for me as a GM is to do the math. And I usually have somebody help me with my math when I do the deliberation of calls and things like that. So you mentioned to me, you're going to start a new game as a player. Have you started playing yet? Or have you started that new campaign?
Yeah, we did one session, and then I haven't heard back, so I don't know if I got kicked out or if everyone's just busy and we haven't found the time yet.
Was it a pre-made adventure that somebody had bought, or was it something they created, homebrew?
I believe it was a homebrew from one of my buddies. I don't know. It was on Roll20, so maybe I don't know if you can do homebrews on Roll20.
Yeah,
But
yeah. My first adventure that I ever created when I did my first GMing, I created a world in Roll20. I used a lot of Google images that if I had ever sold that, I would have got like probably legally in trouble. But most of my tokens, I used a tool called Token Stamp. You can upload an image to Token Stamp, and it can be any image, and then it allows you to create the border around the token. Just like if you were playing with 2D tokens. Some people use minis that are like 3D, depending on if they're playing in person. But having the tokens were really helpful. So, creating maps, there's tons of map makers that you can upload your maps to Roll20. Roll20 is also free. There's a good free version of Roll20. Very cool.
Nice. Yeah, it was fairly user-friendly about the player.
Had you ever played on Roll20 before, or was that your first time?
That was my first time. The other ones we did in person.
And I asked you your preference, in person or virtual. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in person's always better. I think you just get a better chemistry and better vibe when you're in person. It's too easy to check out when like other people are doing stuff. If you're, not together, you're more present when you're there with somebody, and it's just way more fun for this level of stuff.
It's very evident when you're looking at your phone if you're in person, as opposed to if you're on a call. Now, I play some games where video doesn't need to be turned on. And it's kind of like, at a work meeting, some people use Teams if they're in a corporate job. And, some people will leave their camera off and they can really be doing emails. They can be looking at anything. You lose the conversation. In a real conversation, you wouldn't just hopefully start doing something in the middle of talking to somebody. So,
yeah, or I get to roast you if you do, my buddies might look at their phone or something, but we get to call you out and roast you a little bit, and gets to be part of the fun.
So your first game, you guys did it recently. How did your GM, your game master, dungeon master, if you're playing D&D, how did he start it out? What was the hook? How did he pull you into this adventure? Or did you not feel pulled in? Did you feel like it started a little slow?
I actually jumped in the middle. I kind of forgot about this. They had already started their campaign, and so he had to pull me in. And it was a pretty good one. It was so where they were at, they had these different factions of gangs and everything. I was in town visiting, and I was visiting this tavern, and one of the gangs came in because it was, unbeknownst to me, part of the rival gang's territory, and they just killed everybody except for me. And they left me a message.
Lone survivor.
Yeah, I was the lone survivor. They left me a message to give when these people return, get out of our territory, or I can't remember exactly now what the beef was. The crew that I was joining had kind of jumped into that on accident, that beef. And so they were given a message through me of, you better get out of here.
Were you wounded? Did they come upon you wounded, or were you healed? How did you appear?
Unharmed, but covered in blood from everyone else. It was a very bloody scenario.
Traumatic.
Yeah, but Long Dong, he powers through, so he's resilient.
He's tough as mithril.
Tough as mithril. Very good, yeah.
So you started playing, you were a lone survivor. Did your background put you in sort of the sole survivor category? Because I know in D&D you get to choose a background for your character. Or was your background completely separate from how your GM introduced you?
Yeah, so I kind of used my backstory in there as the reason I was at the bar was scouting new locations for the Randy Rogue, expand out of our city. So that's why I was in town at the tavern.
Okay, I'm gonna reel it back. Creating characters, right? That's one of my favorite things with tabletop RPGs. I've created characters that I've never played, ones that just live in a folder of wow, it'd be cool to be this person one day. You said your process was you were talking to your buddy, right? Bouncing ideas off of each other. The characters that you've created, do you usually make them with somebody, or do you create the structure and then go and talk about it, or what's your process? Where do you draw inspiration when you're making your characters besides Quagmire from from Family Guy?
I mean, a lot of it is I love South Park and Family Guy, and so I have a very juvenile sense of humor.
No
But
shame.
yeah, but the characters themselves, he only helped me with the name. He didn't really help me develop the character so much. We were just bouncing ideas off for the name. For him, it was just I just thought it would be really funny. This idea of this warlock who's just super horny and just makes everything dirty. And it's also, when you hang out with teenagers all day, I think you kind of get morphed into one a little bit, and so that's my outlet a little bit is to
Yeah.
get my maturity out through this character.
Yeah, that cathartic ability to act in whether it be acting for real or acting in a D&D game can get those emotions and get those the things you got to bottle up
Yeah.
all day. I've definitely raged as a
Oh yeah.
barbarian in a D&D game where I could not actually
Mhm.
rage in real life.
Absolutely. Just smash everything.
I can really identify. I had a character that was Quagmire-esque back in one of our campaigns. I was a Loxodon, which in the D&D world is like an elephant man. Like he's actually like a humanoid elephant. And stealing shamelessly from characters in books, that's a method. Like that's actually something that many GMs will do. They'll use common fantasy
Mhm.
tropes and try to pull them into the story. And I had always loved those commercials with the most interesting
Oh
man,
yeah.
right, for Dos Equis. So my my elephant talked like him, but then he also took on a very promiscuous
That's great.
a promiscuous, saunter as he went throughout
Ah,
the
that's
world.
good.
As a newer player, like how many maybe I shouldn't call you a new player. Like how many years, if you were to quantify your actual play time, have you been playing D&D from the first game till now?
Yeah, I mean, I would still call myself a beginner. I've been doing I mean, the first game I ever played was probably 5 years ago. But it was like I
Okay.
played for that one for like a year, and then I didn't really play a lot. And then about a year ago, I did a one-off with my partner and some of her friends. It's like, oh, we should do more of this. I was talking to her; she really liked it. She was like, why don't we try to dungeon master ourselves? And I was like, well, I don't think you quite understand how hard it is to dungeon master just yet. She was like, I can do it. I'm like, you got to learn the game first. But it kind of inspired me of like, why don't I learn it? Because I kind of know the game. I want to play a little more, and I really like it.
Yeah.
That was one of my goals this upcoming summer was to actually learn how to do it.
You said something interesting. You have to learn the game first. How much of Dungeons and Dragons do you feel like you need to know before you can run a game? Like in your opinion, what do you think you need to know to be ready to run your first game?
Yeah, I guess where I think I like need more is just there's so many like modifiers, like kind of like the math you were talking about. Is there so many modifiers you have to be ready to calculate and know which ones have to go? And sometimes, like even just for my own character, when I roll something, I'm like, I don't really know exactly what my end score is.
Do you feel like your GM helps you? Like, is your GM kind of like the resident expert when you've played in the past, like helping?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's most of the people I play with don't play like my partner who's never played, like way less experience than I am.
Yeah.
So I feel like I probably would have to be at least somewhat of a
One of the tips that I've gotten from people on Reddit's a wealth of information for tabletop RPG. You want to learn anything. The r/RPG community is really great. Like they'll answer questions and they're more than happy to jump in. But I asked them, like, what does a GM need to know to run a game? Like, how do you learn a game? Like, how do you go through? Do you just read the book? And there's some people out there that don't like reading. They're like, oh my gosh, I got to read a 265-page source book, or there's some that's even more. And that was me. I fall asleep reading, Andy. Like, I can't keep my eyes open, probably because I'm usually reading at night after my kids are in bed. But one of the tips that they gave is that building a character actually can help you learn the game. So I'll give you an example. Somebody in my game, my first game, wanted to be a wizard. And the wizards to me are the hardest thing to learn in D&D. And somebody might comment and be like, no, Clint, it's not that hard. It's just a lot of spells. right? Maybe not at first, maybe not at first level, but eventually they have this repertoire of all these different spells, and they do different things, and they have different conditions, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how am I going to do it?" But if you build your own character, like one that you'll never play. This is why I have a big notebook of them, right, that I've never used. If I know one of my players is going to be a wizard, and I know they're going to take a certain school of magic, like maybe they're I can't remember all the ones from D&D. I'll make the character as though I am them. And that takes a lot of time, right? Because then you're like, oh shoot, like now I'm like studying everybody's character. And if you have four people, now you're making four characters that you'll never play. But just finding the things that are confusing, right? You might be able to look at something and be like, oh, that's easy. Like I get that. That's why I think a lot of players start out as fighters, because it's something we've seen in all of our movies, all of our video games. If you were to choose something in D&D, a class, a scenario, a situation, like what feels the most unclear or confusing when you've played it or seen other people playing at your table?
Yeah, it's definitely the spells and the cantrips and looking up what all of them do, because it is overwhelming for a lot of the classes. When you just look at like even the sheets and you see like even like the weapons, sometimes it's like there'd be like two numbers there. It's like a bunch of numbers in one letter, like a D. And I know the D is always like which dice you're rolling.
Hmm.
Um, but then after that, usually I don't always know what they mean.
Yeah. I think with weapons, what always confused me was that one was like my bonus to my attack that I rolled with my D20. And then the other was the damage dice if I hit.
Hmm.
And I was just like, why is there two? And, the first character I ever built, I remember was a rogue, kind of like your white collar criminal, as my brother in law would say. It was like a halfling that was dressed very floofy with whatever that floofy thing is from the
Yeah,
1800s.
like the Austin Powers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever that thing is. They would wear, if anybody knows what that floofy thing is that people used to wear when they were fancy, please send me an email and let me know. But whatever it was, I remember like it was a simple dagger. Like I was going to have a simple dagger, and I was going to be very like, talk my way out of situations. And if I did have to do something, I would stab them. And just that one dagger of trying to figure out how I was going to use it, I was looking at my character sheet and I was like, it should be easier than this. I should be able to just write it down. And then I learned about things like Roll20 where it does it for you. My favorite virtual tabletop is Foundry. I'm not sponsored by them. I don't get any credit for talking about Foundry VTT, but Foundry is very customizable. I would say Roll20 is great for people who want free and they want it, very accessible on a browser. There's ways to make it, Foundry accessible on a browser, but like the stuff that it does, the things that it calculates, the stuff that it keeps track of, that would be my ideal if I was running a game. And some people actually use that in the room. They will bring their laptop or their computer and they'll use their TV or some sort of monitor to run the game. I guess my next question would be, would you feel comfortable enough with technology to try to bring technology into it, or would you feel like you would want to be more analog, with the true spirit of old D&D?
I would definitely use technology, search functions and that kind of thing. Being able to just search things instead of having to flip through pages is way more preferable to me.
Tip that my friend Jonathan, friend of the pod, he uses PDFs. So he'll get the PDF version of the core book. And I like PDFs and I don't like PDFs, right? Because I don't have like a tablet that I would read my PDF on. But what I love about the book is I like the physical, like I can go anywhere I want, but I can't search a book like I can a PDF. So being able to find those search functions are pretty helpful. Here's what I want to know. If it was easy, what would it look like? That's a question that Tim Ferriss, who wrote The 4-Hour Workweek, has asked and asks in his book. If it were easy, what would running a game of D&D look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the Rolls-20 style where I can like, if I just need to click on the spell or whatever, like, and have it so I can just click on the spell and it kind of does all that math for me, or at least tells me which numbers to add. That is the biggest thing for me, is like some of that administrative stuff and knowing which dice to roll, knowing which modifiers to put in. That's the kind of stuff that really would, if it were easier and streamlined. Roll20 seemed to do a lot of that. Like, and I think that would, because I've only used that the one time, and so I think if I use that more, I think it would probably solve a lot of the problems I think I have.
But you would want to play in person. You would want people to come like to your home so that you would be able to have that interaction.
Right. Yeah, I would still want people around, but I would I like having something to press. And so just having like one laptop there for, it doesn't have to be everybody on Roll20.
Yeah. So I've heard this called like a hybrid situation where you have both virtual but also in person. Some people will bring their own laptops, some people will bring, their tablet or something to be able to move their characters around. But you'll sign in if you were using Roll20, for example. If you were using Roll20, you would sign in as the GM, which gives you the GM view. Right. So there's some things that only the GM can see, especially if you, I don't know if you have to upgrade with Roll20 to get the fog of war, where it covers things as you're moving through, or line of sight. That's a pretty cool feature. But what it would do is you would see that on your laptop, but then you would sign in as a player up on the screen. So then the map that they're looking at is their map. And they can move their own tokens, almost like you had a map in the center of the table, but they're moving them on their own devices. So I've done that before. It works pretty well. And I think the only thing I wished I had was a bigger TV, like a bigger monitor. There's some people that do like these tables, TVs built into their gaming table.
That would be cool.
Yeah, you can. There's like a dude on YouTube that like goes through how he built his and what he bought to do it. I've never had the time nor the income to go and do something like that. But
yeah, it sounds like a wonderful idea, but I don't think I'm ever going to put it into practice.
I've also, one of the other tools that I really love is the Lazy Dungeon Master and Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master by Mike Shea. His idea is, how can I prep the least amount and still give people the feeling of agency? Like they have what their choices matter. That's like the one way you can make me not want to play a game, is if I like
force you into a tunnel. Yeah,
the railroading, I think.
Can't do that.
Yeah, I can't do that. But one of the things he said, I'm probably going to butcher it, is that it doesn't become real until your players make it real. So there's like a whole bunch of list of things that you can potentially have them do, places that they might go and see, and you might have an idea of like the main plot points that you can fit in where you want. But unless they bring it into fruition and it makes sense, it's just a note on your page. And I've adopted that way of GMing, and it put a whole lot of stress off of me. So if you were going to have your own game, would you take a pre-made adventure, or would you want to build your own adventure homebrew?
I think I'd probably try to do a pre-made one first to get a look at it and see like a structure first.
Have you had your eyes on any of them?
No, I haven't really. Like, I just kind of got the idea to be a dungeon master in my head recently, and I was just planning to start in the summer. So I haven't really done any real work towards it. And so my only view of it all has been a player so far.
That's another place where I jump into Reddit. I just be like, what is the best module for a new GM, but with a really great story? My favorite was the beginner's box for D&D. It was called Lost Mines of Phandelver. It's a very beloved adventure, but there's so many ones that I think are cooler, that would be really fun. And you don't always have to start at first level. Sometimes the slog of being a first level squishy character isn't so fun. Would you ever consider doing a one shot? Like you've joined a one shot where they played one game and a couple of hours and then the story was done. Would you want to start a full campaign right away, or do you feel like the one shot might be a way to jump into it?
I was thinking a one shot probably would be how I would first start out, but it kind of depends on who wanted to play and what they want to do. If they were interested in a campaign, I might try a campaign. My thought was to start with a one shot.
How are you going to find your players? Like, do you already know who you want to ask?
Yeah, I got plenty of people I can ask. Yeah, I don't think for a one shot, I don't think it'd be hard to find people to do a sustained campaign. That's where when you get to be an adult, that's a challenge to get people every single week or every other week even, or the consistency gets challenging.
I've tried every month. That's like the best way I can do it. And if I had my way, I would love to play every week. Oh, that would be so cool. Just like you're watching a TV show, but you get to live the TV show. I was talking to some other gamers and they said their number one challenge is scheduling, hands down. It's just so hard. And they use all the different apps. Like there's Doodle, which I don't know if Doodle is still free. That used to be a really cool app where you'd see everybody's schedule and they would select the dates that worked for them. There's all sorts of calendar scheduling apps, but do you feel like we've missed anything? Like, is there any questions that you feel like should be asked that I did not ask?
Can I ask you some questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, what's the best advice you got when you first started?
Yeah. So the best advice I got when I started as a player, and this kind of went down the rabbit hole because I was like, so what can I do? What can I do like in this made up world? Like, and my brother-in-law was the guy who got me into it. His name's Tyler, super cool dude. And he was like, anything. You can do whatever you want. I'm like, wait, so I can get up like on top of the statue and just start like raining down, hell on all these like little booger goblin things. He's like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. And I did that right when I was playing with him and he was cool with it. But then I got into some other groups where they weren't cool with that because every player plays a little bit differently. I am of the rule of cool kind of way of playing. If it's cool, I'm okay letting rules slide. But the careful thing you have to do is be careful that everybody has that expectation. Because if you're playing with somebody who's like, the rules are important. You got a rules lawyer. That's a term in D&D and all tabletop role playing. Somebody that's going to hold you to it. Rules is written is the law. They don't like playing with me unless I'm ready to play with them and abide by the rules. I would say the best advice was, yes, you can do anything if it's agreed upon by the group. So having that shared commonality. I think the other thing that was really helpful for me is the suggestion to have what's called a session zero. And that's where everybody gets together and you talk through table rules, etiquette, like when we're at the table, are phones allowed? Some people are like, no, you can't have your phone. Other people are like, I don't care. Text whoever you need to. Are snacks allowed? Can people be chomping and eating chips and doing all this stuff? So that was the other really helpful thing. And no person told me to do a session zero. That was something that just came up time and again on all the forums, all the podcasts, was that session zeros are also where people can make their characters together. And that's cool. I've done that as well. I actually stole a mechanic from Fate. I believe it's Fate. Somebody's going to tell me it wasn't Fate, but it was the Fate game. And there's a way that they create bonds with one another. Fiasco is another game. Fiasco by Jason Morningstar is another game that creates bonds between players at the table. And having pre-made bonds, just people automatically have story hooks. They automatically know what to do. Like your GM took you as a scouter and made you a survivor, and that's how you entered in. So instantly they're like, well, everybody was killed. We got to bring him into the fold. Like it was just natural that that's what would happen next in the story. So bonds are really important. Session zero is really important. Having agreed upon how are we playing, and are we playing fast and loose? Are we playing hardcore? Each game will lend itself to the rules, lawyers, and others. Like Pathfinder 2E, super hardcore rules. Like it's very mechanical, very strategic.
Is that a different game, or is that a different?
Yeah. So Pathfinder is like D&D's cousin, so to speak. They used to be the same game, and they actually broke away after Dungeons and Dragons went into its 4th edition. There were gamers who were like, we hate this. We don't like this new version. And so they kept with Pathfinder, it was called 3.5, and they created Pathfinder 1. And that's when Paizo, the company, not Wizards of the Coast, but Paizo came to be. So that game is a lot more strategic than D&D. D&D 5e, I think, is easier for players to come into. And I really loved 5e, but there came to a point where me personally, I felt there weren't enough options. Like I wanted to be very customizable in my character, almost like I'm playing Skyrim or Mass Effect was one of my favorite games of all time. And I felt like you could really customize like your person. Jedi, what was it called? Knights of the Old Republic was another game that I used to play all the time growing up. And you could really just make your person your own. So Pathfinder, I think, lends better to customization and making your character. And because I love character creation so much, it's like my favorite. Nobody's going to make the same character twice when you're playing Pathfinder. Whereas D&D, you're like, oh, I have a barbarian and he can do this. And you can multi-class, but usually if you just stay on the path, that's kind of going to happen. That's my own opinion. Some people are going to be like, D&D 5e rocks. Then you have some people that love Pathfinder 2e. It's kind of a contentious thing. And there's some people who like both. So that was more than what you wanted in the answer. But
that was good.
I think you said, what was the best advice? I'm going to recap. Best advice is have a session 0. Agree upon how you're going to play, table etiquette and house rules. And some of those things will happen as you go. And then also you can do anything as long as it's agreed upon.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know. My dungeon master had a session 0, the first one I did. I do remember that, where we all just got together. I think we hooked just like you were talking about, he hooked some of our characters together in certain ways. Like these people were like half brothers or something. I don't remember all the details. It was a long time ago, but he did a lot of the things. And now listening to you talking about it, it's really funny to kind of think back and like, oh, that's what he was doing.
Yeah, definitely not. I'm definitely not coming up with this on my own. Like I was in the same spot when I began, and I was like, I really want to run my own game because I'm not getting to play enough, or maybe a group fell apart. Kind of like you. You're like, we played for about a year and then it kind of fizzled. And then I wanted to do my own thing. Well, how do you do your own thing? Like, do I need to get the books? Do I need, will I have people to play with me? Do I need to get a virtual tabletop? Do I need to pay, or can I use the free version, and give it a trial run? I've also tried to go all analog before, where I bought a map. It was called a battle mat. I bought it from Paizo, and you just use a dry erase marker. You can play D&D with bare bones, just in your imagination, theater of the mind. And as long as you just have some tokens, a dry erase marker or a dry erase board, you can make a lot of that stuff up as you go. But it's a different style of playing than if you were buying a pre-made adventure that has pre-made maps and everything ready for you. I think the other thing is some people think when you buy a pre-made game, they're like, oh, I don't have to do any work. Like they've done it all for me. This is great. But you still have to read it. Like you still have to prepare. And, I know one of my favorite podcasts, the Glass Cannon Network, one of their main GMs is Troy LaValle, and he will read the whole book. He'll read the whole book and then he'll go back, so like he like immerses himself. He's also an actor by training. And so I think that's like a form of method acting. But, sometimes that's why I like creating my own story more, because I know it instantly because I created it. Mm-hmm. But then you have to go and make all the monsters and build the encounters, which there's some really great tools out there for building encounters on the fly. I always liked Kobold Fight Club. I think it's called like Kobold Fight Club Plus now. I think there was some like, what do you call it? Licensing issues with the name or something like that. But you literally can just put in the number of players that you have on the board, choose the monsters, and it'll tell you the difficulty of the encounter. So you don't have to create that. That was super helpful for me because I didn't want to just obliterate my first level characters with a Medusa or some sort of centaur that comes in and just blasts them out of oblivion. You got to give them the grunts. They got to fight the goblins. They got to, maybe a bugbear. The pre-made adventures do that already. As long as you're okay reading. I listen to a lot of actual play podcasts. I know Not Another D&D podcast is really popular for Dungeons and Dragons. You got Critical Role, who's like the king, the big kid in the playground. That's been around for a long time. A bunch of voice actors are playing D&D, and Matt Mercer is, I believe he played the voice of Ganondorf in the last Legend of Zelda game. So he's like a legit dude, and they do Vox Machina. I'm probably saying it wrong. It's now a TV show because they're all voice actors, right? So now you have like a cartoon, and D&D is not like a nerdy thing anymore.
I think I've seen that maybe, or at least like I've seen an ad for it or something.
Yeah, that came out of their game. The Mighty Nine, I think, was in their first campaign. It's like 3-4 hours long. I can't watch it. No disrespect. I'm sure it's wonderful material, but it's just like, oh my gosh, I don't have time anymore. Like, where was this when I was in college and didn't have kids and a job?
Yeah.
I would have ate this up. Something else that came out, I asked you the question, would you ever consider other games other than D&D? And you said, yes. What would you be looking for? Would you be looking for something still with that fantasy feel? Or is there like, think of a movie or something you've always wanted to play. If there was an RPG for it, what would it be?
I would also be down for sci-fi. I definitely enjoy the sci-fi world as well as fantasy. And so those two would definitely be my main choices.
What is your favorite sci-fi series or favorite sci-fi movie?
Stargate SG-1's probably my favorite series. Probably what I've seen the most, at least. I watched that and Stargate Atlantis many times through.
I loved Atlantis. That was a great one.
Yeah, it's really funny now that Jason Momoa got big. So I'll be watching it on TV, and my partner comes in. And she's like, "Oh, is that Jason Momoa?" Like,
yeah, he is kind of scrawny.
Yeah, you can't tell right away, but when you look close enough, you're like, "Oh, that is Jason Momoa."
I loved it because John Shepard was the name of the main character, and that's the main character in Mass Effect. Like, it's just like the same, the same name. Free League Publishing is one of my absolute favorite publishers right now. I did the Kickstarter a couple years ago for the One Ring second edition. So that's the Lord of the Rings RPG that's probably the most popular and used right now. There's definitely a Star Wars RPG. I think Fantasy Flight Star Wars RPG is the most recent one. And I played that with a buddy. His name's Robert, also a cool dude, friend of the pod. What's crazy about that game is that they have it's a dice pool. So much like, there's one dice and you're adding a modifier, this one is more story or narrative based. There's games that don't have anything to do with like, it's not so much about winning, it's telling a good story. So they'll roll a bunch of dice based on your abilities and whatever, and then you're canceling out like pluses and minuses. Canceling out successes and failures until so you could potentially succeed what you're doing, but with a setback. So it's like you did it, but now there's something that's messing with you guys and you have a new issue that's involved. And I just think that's so cool. Like it really flips the whole, like, if I get this number, then I win on its head. It allows for more depth of storytelling. But for the crunchy people, they're like, give me Pathfinder. I don't want pluses and minuses. Just give me a success or a failure. One of the games that I played that I've wanted to play, and I would love to play this with people on the podcast. It's Blades in the Dark. So that's one where, and I'm gonna butcher this too. You're in a city, kind of like a steampunk turn of the century kind of apocalyptic world where you are caught inside of the city. There are demons outside of the city that prevent you from leaving, and you have like a force field around the city, and you are a bunch of scoundrels. You're all like a team of criminals that have to steal things. But you can't escape. You can't just leave the country because you'll be eaten up by demons. So it's like a pressure cooker of conflict and story because you have to somehow survive these heists and still get away with it. That would be like my number one if I had the infinite number of time to do things.
I should have been taking notes. I feel like if you think about any of the various like games we talked about, or things that like names that I'm probably going to forget, and you want to write them down, that'd be amazing.
I'll put all the resources in the show notes.
Oh, excellent.
Cobalt Fight Club and Roll20, I'll put in there so that they, the people know about it.
Perfect.
Right now, I'm playing one game. I get my once a week, but I don't have to GM. I'm doing so Pathfinder, right? We talked about Pathfinder, dirty cousin of D&D. They created basically D&D in space. So that's another fantasy option. It's called Starfinder. Starfinder 1 was kind of weird in the rules, and I think they made it more like, so Pathfinder 2e was super crunchy. 1e, first edition, was really crunchy. And then they recently came out over the last few years with Pathfinder 2e, which has gotten really great.
When you say crunchy, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so crunchy means like lots of modifiers, lots of like looking up the rule.
Got to crunch a lot of numbers.
And some people love that. Some people are like, I only want it if it has really intense math, or you can only move X number. Like I think of like somebody be like, well, if I was calculating the arc of this parabola,
Yeah. With the wind resistance,
and the way that the sun is hitting, like that would be what I mean by crunchy.
Gotcha.
Well, cool, man. Thanks for coming on. Really love your story of getting into it, loving it, and then wanting to jump in and run it. I think a lot of people feel that, and I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed doing it for the very first time. And there are just tips and tricks that you can spend hours looking at it on Reddit, or you can just listen to somebody tell you what to do.
Yeah. No, I'll reach out when I start a game of my own. I think I think you could do a cool arc.
Oh, that'd be awesome. And then you can tell me what worked for you. Like, what are some things that you learned along the way as you started your game that you didn't expect? Excited to see what you do. Really awesome to connect with you, and feel free to reach out if you want anything, need anything, or just want to chat.
Yeah, I'll text you when I start looking at campaigns and stuff. But yeah, again, let me know anytime you need somebody to hop on the podcast, or if you ever need somebody to play a game, I'm here.
Thanks, Andy. Take care.
Good to see you. Take care. Have a good one.
Join us next time as we find the best ways to have great times with friends and experience amazing stories through tabletop role-playing. Have you ever wanted to start your very own tabletop RPG group, but you just don't know how? What if you could follow 6 simple tasks to get your game up and running in less than 30 days? Oh, you can, my friend. Download the free Quick Start Guide either by clicking on the link in the show notes or by visiting claimtogamepodcast.com. Follow the 6 simple tasks outlined in the guide and go enjoy and play your best game. And may you keep having fun as we continue to make our claim to game.